I shouldn't even be here. Mum's the word, I burn down the house, I gum up the works. I'm the wrong vibration, I summon the earth. When the cups break, better make enough of the cure. I go proto-human, I'm so unruly. Architect of my Kurokushi on guard. Hop in the box of chopped arms on the blocks beyond the pop art stockyard. Got a red bone right to the inside. I can turn a rib cage into wind chimes. You don't want to engage, kiddo, it's a burden to bear. It's a whirly bird, never seen the surface of the air. I lost count of the cooks, every coward and crook. Any memory of similar to an out of the woods. Some two unrubbed elbows, well in the weeds. Even a good eye couldn't find the edge of my seat. Oh, potpourri of confusing powers all mashed together and shooting outward. Intel gleaned from the Prince of Dark. Scarecrow every 10 per infinity yards. When a spirit investor consider living apart. It's official, I ain't signing for the mission alert. My call of duty, stay all consuming. Even if y'all see him as a dollar movie. Look, best in show, I'm the worst there is. That pest control is no urban myth. That floating skull just won't shut up. It's on a business trip, I'm below the crust. Y'all know what's up. Bad news from the black lung. Used to flatline, that shit is so last month. Yo, I don't need money to burn. I need sunsets purple and mother of pearl. Come on. I'ma need you to ease back. No peace out, flee to the evac. Don't be where you be at. I've been looking for a reason to react. I'ma need you to reset. No plea, no please, no defense. Don't creep in the deep end. I've been looking for a reason to see red. Territorial organisms, each glorifying our poor decisions. I'm a force you can forecast, swarming insects who eat all the corn like war is business. I'm pageant wait for my shallow grave. Patch me in from that astral plane. Ain't ring the bell. I pass through the walls of cool burgundy in both tooth and claw. Midnight manage an incredible feat for GPS collar on the neck of the beast to go. Beep beep, any neck of the reef. Put a reaper on a second week of medical leave. I'm a seer, I can tell you how the curtain descend. And maybe hint at how it isn't with a circle of friends. I go by with the black sheep. Rah, catch me a Patsy. Spaz, unravel and blaspheme. Riddler to keep the gate. It's a Groundhog D-Day, Jesus H. I was born on a horse at a steeplechase. My forte's frontline real estate. Plus steak and breeds, I take bloody as hell. If it burn black, point him at the honey and milk. I ain't sitting while you sully the well. I turn up in a jiff. Jackknife when I jump in the pit. 100 hands, 1 million eyes, 2 bleeding gums. I will survive. That last line's rose-colored only for a limited time. It all shifts when you militarize. I had a vision of a feather on a seasonal wing. In the shadow of a gargoyle flinging a brick. Lean in, steal your chips. Where I'm from, y'all wouldn't even be in the mix. Hey. I'ma need you to ease back. No peace out, flee to the evac. Don't be where you be at. I've been looking for a reason to react. I'ma need you to reset. No plea, no please, no defense. Don't creep in the deep end. I've been looking for a reason to see red.
Dr. Fox, what's up, man?
I'm rocking my head, Brad. Love music. Loving it. How are you doing?
Good, man. It's been a hot minute.
I know.
It's been at least a month, I think, since we've done one of these. So,
well, it's not like we've been busy at all. I mean, I think you've been traveling. You've had a few conferences to go to.
yeah, I've been out and about a little bit.
I see you've got what, Castor? You're talking with Castor soon, right?
Yeah, Thursday. I want to talk up a little bit about that today. As always, if you guys are watching, please let's see your comments. And this is supposed to be a really open forum. Before we get any further, though, just want to go ahead and make a world premiere. Never been done before. Rappers out here dropping diss tracks, and I feel like I think clinical research could get spiced up and be a little more fun with that. So we have our first AI generated diss track. And Dan Sfera, I'm calling you out. I did not create this, by the way. It is AI generated, sent from someone else. So, but I just think it's hilarious. So I'm going to play it. It's only about a minute and a half long. You ready?
Let's hear it.
Here we go.
But I'm the master class, step back as I school you. In the lab, you're the man with a plan, but on the mic, I'm the fan favorite, understand. You started it up in you, I got your sights set high, but I'm scaling peaks, waving as I fly by. You manage trials, I manage to amaze. I drop hot tracks, you're lost in the research maze. You've got your podcast, your vid's so slick, but my rhymes come faster than your patient clicks. So equity, that's pretty slick, but my flows are fire and they stick. DSCS, yeah, you paved the way, but I'm the headline news, front page every day. You train newbies, that's a solid feat, but my lyrics train beats to move on their own 2 feet. So here's to you, Mr. Clinical Trial. Your hustle's big, but I went by a mile.
It's so bad, but good at the same time.
And the style, but in this rap battle, I'm the one who makes the crowd go wild. Hey Dan, just curious, why you're out there changing the game? Are you bleeding Viva Orange or just playing it the same?
It's so terrible and yet so great at the same time. So the gauntlet's been thrown down. So I expect a response in 48 hours.
Yeah, like the query resolution, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
that'll work.
If I hear something back, then I win by default. Cool. All right, not that's out of the way. Sorry, guys. I have to have some fun with it. Yeah, so I mean, first let's talk about Wisconsin, man. Saw you out there at the event the university puts on. I think this is their second year. I think it's really cool, especially coming from a university doing a conference that's sort of more focused. They've kind of both been focused on like the community, which again I thought was great. Got to see your keynote. Tell us about your experience and how was it, man?
Keynote was great, absolutely great, very inspirational. Honestly, I must have had too much caffeine. I timed myself at like 44 minutes, and I finished at like 36 minutes. So it was really, really short. But on the bright side, I think it piqued a lot of interest because the ideas and the questions filled up all of that space that I didn't have. So it was all about community-based research, bringing research to our communities, talking about the research deserts, kind of dissecting FDA guidance and what we can and cannot do, what the FDA says we can do versus defensibility versus what sites are afraid of. It was amazing.
Yeah, and again, I thought it was well done, really great. I mean, obviously, as you know, this could be like, what's up, Patty? Yeah, Wisconsin, man. I mean, Madison is surprisingly a dope city I'd never heard of, and well, I'd never been to until a year ago. Now, I look forward any opportunity to go there. So, yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be a lot more conversation to think about, especially like what's happening. And you did touch on something I didn't realize. Like the DCT guidance is actually supposed to finalize sometime this month.
Any day it'll finalize. So
yeah, well,
we'll see.
We'll see about that.
Yeah.
Color me skeptical. Again, even if it does, like I'm sure it will drop, but like at this point, is it like feels like the fire's cooled, right? Like I'm not reading about it constantly.
Yeah, everyone's moving to AI now, so we're going from DCT to AI.
It just feels like there's been a little bit of a pullback. I mean, obviously there are things that still remain. Like, I mean, if you want to call ePro like DCT, I guess you can. I mean, as we know, the guidance is more focused on like the local healthcare provider, and things like task logs. And again, I still think once it passes, like there's still going to be a whole question about how to like truly operationalize. I hate that word, but I can't think of a better one.
What was it that you said when that started? Taskagation or something?
Right.
I mean,
but again, at what point are you really just exchanging one problem for another, or like, I mean, why? It's basically a delegation log, but a little bit different. Why not go?
And a lot of people. I was on the SCRS Public Policy Committee to write a response to the FDA.
Sure.
And a lot of people came in and said, dude, what you are proposing, we have been doing for years in tandem visits. Mayo Clinic, Memorial Sloan Kettering, the big guys, departments, motherships, going out to clinics, doing things, then bringing it back to the mothership. You could tell that the people who wrote this guidance were not on the front lines because they didn't realize that this stuff is already being done and it's fully defensible and auditable, and that FDA has already looked at this and identified it during those audits. So I think
Well,
that is one of the big things.
I think the only distinction maybe, and again, maybe I'm wrong. I think the line between like who's responsible for what to what degree makes me a little still nervous. Like the
Yep.
concept of like something happening outside the purview of the direct study team, which we know, like, yes, obviously patients go see, doctors for standard of care appointments and visits and assessments. And sometimes those are recorded and used as research, but it seems like they're kind of broadening that line even more.
Mhm.
And I don't know about you, man, but my experience is the more people involved,
Yep.
the messier things get. And ultimately, I mean, I'm the one who's sitting in front of an auditor for a week, not
Yeah.
that random person in a clinic somewhere who did an assessment and missed an AE or something didn't get documented correctly, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And again, I hate to be the
No, you're
one of
exactly
those
right.
people that keeps like pushing the like concept of being scared to like evolve, because I do think a lot of good things can come out of this, but at the same
Yeah.
time, it's like how to walk that line.
Yeah, and how have they addressed home health this whole time? Because when we were doing home health, especially the home health that a CRO says you're allowed to use because it was sponsor preferred, that's when we have to eat the deviations because they don't have any skin in the game.
Yeah,
They go in and they screw up your window on blood draws, and they come in, oh my bad, we have a deviation. It's like, do you realize what we have to own because of what you did?
right. Well, that's the whole thing, man. Like that
Yeah,
that extends to everything. It's hard enough to do under fairly tight controls sometimes. So then now it's a doctor an hour away asking their clinic staff to help do something that they're not maybe that bought into doing. Otherwise, they would be doing trials themselves. That's where I think it starts to get real, like
Yeah.
cost benefit analysis-y, so lack of a better word, because then you're like, well, if I have a clinic and they're like killing it for me as a healthcare provider relationship, like I'm probably going to go make them a site anyway,
hmm
because then they can also benefit more. And they're showing that they're willing to do that amount of work, then they might as well be a site,
yeah.
at that
And that's
point.
kind of what your question was, because you were like, it's a lot of work to do this. Why not just open up a bunch of sites?
Well, and
And
the problem is, again, like, what are you hoping to accomplish here? Like picking up a few patients here and there across a whole bunch of sites, because I think that's a recipe for disaster. But I think if you can sort of better identify like your more busy sites that truly convert into sites, then you've got something a little more powerful there, possibly.
Mhm. I think the true key, and I really do believe this, because like what you said, the PI is ultimately responsible. You as an administrator, you're the one that has to look at an auditor. Therefore, the site has to own the decision to do this technology. This is not a series of top-down tech that you can do. It's just not going to work. Sites are going to have to be able to choose DCT logistics, capabilities, and processes, just like they choose their own CTMS platform.
Well, that's the one point of contention within the guidance, right, is that it has to be protocol driven, or it has to be like laid out very specifically in the protocol, which again, I'm unsure how that translates. Like,
So in the guidance, and we're going into DCT a little more. I want to talk
Yeah.
more about other things because we had some other topics here, but it is in the protocol, but it's not by protocol. That's the key. It's by visit. IRB permits you to do DCT by visit, which means it's up to the PI's discretion to exercise that use of DCT by visit.
Gotcha. Yeah. And again, that's where I think it'll start to get interesting.
Mhm.
And it's still not clear, not real clear to me. We play
It's
around
still-
with different concepts and things, but to your point, like, if you're already working out of a sort of centralized model, you're probably doing a lot of this stuff anyway, with or without a bunch of additional technology. So we'll see. It may not be as I don't know if it'll be as impactful as it was originally made out to be. And again, it already feels like people are kind of, we don't even really do like remote monitoring. I mean, I feel like so much stuff is going backwards, and sort of retracting, from this whole never going back. Everything's technology now. Everything's remote. Not so much. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, so DCT was one, but the other thing, and I don't know, were you at the panel with the patients and the doctors and the Brandon,
Yeah.
the kid?
Mhm.
So a lot of those stories were really cool because you saw, and again, I would have loved to see some PIs who were not part of the institution, because we have like a lot of PIs who have access to university resources to do these kinds of things. I would have loved to see private practice community investigators who were PIs on that panel, because I wonder if you might have a different story. But some of those stories are really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed by the buy-in from even, you know, the few physicians, and I mean how, you know, passionate about it they were. I mean, it's not I mean, again, I've been outside of academia for a while, so maybe it's just me, but it's hard to find people that are that, you know, committed to doing it. And that's where, to your point, like, get out in the community. I think it's tougher without having layers of support upon layers of support. You know, it's a little more of a grind. You got to really want to do it, you know?
And that's actually, as I was traveling, and you saw this at like that skateboard cafe place, is really cool. But going around in the community and just randomly talking to people and asking them, you know, just strike up a conversation, because it always comes up, what do you do? And you talk about clinical research and you try to find other people who know about it. It doesn't happen. People just don't know about clinical research. And I think we're going to be spending the rest of our lives trying to raise awareness in our communities about even the existence of clinical research beyond a COVID trial.
Right. Yeah. No, there's still a lot of education that needs to be done. I just started making up lies about what I do for a living when people ask me.
I'm a professional hacky sack kicker or something.
Yeah, bass fisherman, whatever.
Bass
you know,
fisherman,
doesn't matter. It's easier. It's easier than trying to explain, you know, clinical trials.
So I have to ask, you went to an SCRS conference, right?
I did, yeah.
How did that go?
It was good, man. I mean, it was the oncology summit. It was good. I didn't feel well, so I didn't like participate as much as I would have liked to, but it was actually, I mean, it was great. It was kind of what I expected. It was on the smaller side of maybe what I had originally expected, but I think that is kind of good in a way. I kind of appreciate the being a little bit more like intimate versus, you know, over the top. Yeah. And, you know, again, it's interesting for me as somebody who doesn't work inside like a huge, I work with an institution, but like there aren't like 7 departments collaborating together to like pull off a clinical trial, and hearing like that from some of these larger like academic centers. And I'm like, oh shit, like that sounds terrible, but it's also a real testament to like, you know, the industry, like people getting this shit done when there's so many different moving parts involved.
Yeah.
So it was cool. It was cool. I would like to see something that's more focused, and maybe I missed like some of the stuff about smaller like community based oncology research. And I also know it's not like maybe super prevalent. Maybe there's good reason for that. But yeah, I think I would have liked to see a little more on that, because I can't relate to like, again, having like 4 department heads to like go talk to who can like help, who have been there for a decade, you know?
Yeah.
And instead you're kind of like figuring it out yourself, you know, from scratch.
With deep organization pockets, with this infrastructure that small startup sites or oncology clinics don't have.
Well, that's what you're hearing. You're hearing them be like, yeah, we just, you know, developed our own software to do this. I'm like, cool, I can't do that. Like, yeah, you know, it's just not an option that exists.
That was my first one. My first SCRS was at the oncology one, and it was one of the first ones in person. I think there was one that was remote during COVID, and then we went to the in-person one. But it's not just about oncology. It's a lot of networking. So a lot of people go there, and then they added that the include component. So if you're there for a couple extra days before, you got the diversity part.
Yeah, so. I came in a little bit late, so I did miss that part. But again, I like that they're putting on a lot of little shows like that. Not shows, like little smaller conferences that give people the ability to maybe could go to something closer to them instead of like the one big hurrah every year. So that's kind of nice.
And I think there's the technology one's coming too. There's that Scottsdale one.
Oh, okay. I think I've seen that. I didn't know what the focus of it was.
So the tech ones talk about AI generative tech stacks for sites, things like that. This is, I think, their second year for that one.
I don't know, man. I'm almost just like tired of talking about tech for sites. I'm like, I don't care anymore. Just like
It's all over the place.
and like nothing's really different. I feel like it's kind of, I mean, not that I'm not partially responsible for like talking it to death, but it's almost like, all right, I'm bored with it now. Like something will happen. There'll be more consolidation, or people will continue to sort of bow out, and eventually we'll end up with maybe some like true leaders, and then maybe they'll actually get better. But you know,
so I'm going to bring up tech because I don't know if you were here for this one, but Wisconsin had 2 people from Epic, the EMR group. They talked, and I didn't realize what Epic had going for clinical trials.
Yeah, I didn't see it this year. They spoke last year too. I'm at least kind of familiar with some of the stuff they have, but yeah, what are they?
So
getting into now?
They're going direct to sponsors, trying to pretty much generate feasibility-based population data based off of geographic region and site based off of the hospitals who are part of the Epic system. They reference 220 million patients in the system. And so when sponsors go to them and pay into their system, they can have a pretty good idea of the feasibilities, or at least the patient demographics that sites have. They've layered on top of that informed consent. They've layered on top of that some kind of a rating system based off of enrollment for sites. They can kind of, so sponsors can see your hustle factor. I think that's what they called it for enrollment. Yeah. And apparently I didn't go, but if you are ever in Madison, Wisconsin, Epic has their own campus of like Harry Potter based fantasy rooms.
Yeah, I know they've got like some crazy. Some people just have too much money, you know. It's cool, but like,
it's like
too much, man.
Holy, I had no idea.
Ginormous is a good word, I think, probably, Patty, to describe. Yeah, no, I know they've had like a few different research, like plugins or elements, but I mean, it makes sense. They're huge and they've got contracts everywhere. So being able to like play around with that much data,
yeah,
makes sense. I guess we'll see. I mean,
we'll see. I mean, there's a reason why it hasn't, taken storm and taken over the industry. There's barriers to it.
For sure.
I knew that people in the EMR world were dabbling in tech for clinical research, especially like the EMR scrubbers and the patient referrals and things like that, but nothing as comprehensive as what they were presenting.
But I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, why have? I was just talking about this with someone. There's dozens of like the EMR scraping plugins. It's fine, but like Epic. I mean, again, I maybe I can pull up like how many hospitals and clinics Epic is like covering, because it's got to be the most. So I mean, why don't they just do a better job of it themselves with something built in? And I know we've looked before, Patty, to your point, like at some of the research modules, and like they were extremely costly. Which again, if you're not already a huge like research institution doing that stuff, then that's extremely prohibitive.
So what they were talking about is they're going after, of course, who buys Epic? It's your big hospitals and your clinical groups. So it'll come with that licensure, and then they're also going to supplement it with going after the sponsors buying into their network. So
I mean, that's an interesting angle. Makes sense.
I mean, it makes sense. They, the people who hold the data are going to hold the influence.
True. Well, you mentioned I'm doing a talk with Dirk on Thursday from Castor about, I think, his question, I think, was very genuine in terms of like sites often complain about like bad protocols. Like, what does that mean? And I don't know that he felt like he got like a very specific answer. Like, and so I started typing out like this whole paragraph, and I was like, you know what, maybe he'll just want to like talk about it. We can just like have a conversation instead of long fields of text, walls of text back and forth on LinkedIn. So it'll be interesting. I'm curious to hear again, I mean, from other people, like, and I have a feeling like when we say bad protocols, we often mean very different things, even like amongst sites. For me, it's often that, it's multiple things, but it's often that a protocol is so removed from standard practice that any patient who is engaged in the healthcare system is not going to qualify simply by virtue of having seen a doctor.
Yeah.
And then, even if they have to essentially delay treatment by virtue of there being a placebo arm, even though there are acceptable and approved treatments on the market. And this is also, maybe very depending on what kind of therapeutic area you're working in. But like, we've seen it in GI trials, like I've had patients get very sick and have to get, colons resected. I mean, because they were on a placebo in a trial when they could have been on an active treatment. And to me, that's a bad protocol. You can't hardly get anyone to agree to be a part of that. Now there's an argument to be made, and I'm sure we'll go more into detail with this, later. That maybe that's what they need to prove their hypothesis, right? Like, there's the scientific part, which is like, hey, like, if we really want to know if it works, this is like the risk that has to happen, because you can't have those other variables. And if that's the case, then I think we just need to not give up, but we need to like give up on the fact and stop saying things like clinical research is a care option, because I've seen it be just as bad for people as it can be good, in instances like that. And it's not a care option, it's science, right? So it's kind of like pick one, but you can't have it both ways.
Well, and we look at the past. If you really look at the past on clinical research, especially if you take GCP or look at the history with our diverse populations, I would never call clinical research a care option, because I guarantee you that's what they told diverse populations back in the day when they did some very bad things. So that's my number one kick on that is look back at the history. Look at the Tuskegee trials. Look at those where those were apparently care options. And guess what? They were not. They were masked as care options so that patients believed their doctors, and the doctors did some very bad things for some interesting scientific results. So that's my soapbox on that. I don't really want to get much more into that, but that is a kind of a loaded question, because it depends on your stakeholders, right? It depends on, number one is bad protocols could be a result of the outcome. So you'd have to look at the outcome and then reverse engineer back. Are bad protocols based off of deviations? Or is it because they're not properly communicated in that? Or did we not have things in the schedule of assessments that were in the actual text that we missed? Did we miss a pregnancy test, an ancillary, a scan? Or I love what Gustavo said, because that's exactly right. Sometimes when it comes to protocols, people do while you're at it. We don't want to spend another $100 million. So let's just add one more test, just one more test.
And a wearable and an optional sub-study, 3 optional sub-studies, and
PK,
additional PK draws. All right.
And before you know it, you're overloading your site. You're not paying them for 3 trials. You're paying them for 1, because that's you're trying to save your money. And what's the highest number of vials you've ever had to draw out of a patient for a trial?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty where we routinely draw 12 to 15.
And that's standard. You've got some of the guys out there. I saw a 28 vial trial once. 28 vials. There was another one, and I think for me, the biggest case of a bad protocol is one that compromises patient safety. And for example, you've got the protocols, especially the sample collection guys, they're really bad for this, but trying to get like an entire liter of blood from a patient, or trying to prioritize phase 4 very sick cancer patients for your blood draw study for free-floating tumor cells, so you can do diagnostics, when these guys already have ports, not allowing the use of ports because, of course, it's going to compromise your sample, even though it hurts your patient more. Those kinds of trials, I think they were developed in such a vacuum without a consideration for the patients they are working for. I think those define very, very bad protocols.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a pretty good, I like this example, right? Like, you don't try to build a vehicle that can go across everything, right? All in one. It's just, it's probably going to do all those things poorly. It's like anything else in life, right? Like, it's better to be have a certain level of specificity in what you're doing. And again, it's hard to express how much that trickles down into a bad experience for both site and patient. And we're doing it now. Like, we're going back through all these studies that we accepted that were like, these suck. But you take the study, whether you have a patient or not, you got to keep up with protocol amendments and every little piece of paper that's generated, from a regulatory side. It becomes a true burden. And pretty soon that, small startup cost you got turned upside down. And, you're just wasting everybody's time and money. And, even trying to talk a patient into a trial with the placebo arm when they're like, but I can get treatment. Like, I can get an actual treatment. Why?
Don't forget that. Have you ever had a situation where your lab manual contradicts your protocol?
Well, then you get into like the other part when I think people say bad protocols is what they really mean is like bad operationalizing of protocols or bad support and resources around a protocol, because a protocol can be actually written fairly well and maybe even be easy to enroll, but then all the other parts are garbage. And so it's not the protocol per se, but sort of all the things around the protocol. Because we all know like a protocol isn't enough to like do a study. You really can't.
Yeah.
I mean, and someone can hand you a protocol and you're like, sure, this looks great. But then, it doesn't reference 15 other things that are in other manuals or
documents or
slides or God knows where they're hiding. So you don't know that again until it's too late. So
my favorite, and let's see how you would deal with this, Brad. But I was negotiating a budget for a clinical trial, right? And so I'm working with this whole other silo part of a department CRO. But they probably don't even talk to ClinOps people a whole lot. But I'm sitting there saying, okay, we need payment for dry ice shipments for this. And they came back and they said, well, you have to call and get prior authorization before shipping the sample if you want us to pay for this dry ice. How would you as a site feel as though, you've got this sample that you have to ship and it has to be shipped within the day. And then you have to sit there and wait for them to approve the dry ice so that you can ship that sample.
Yeah, that's insanity.
I said, heck no, it compromises the quality of the trial. And no, and guess what? They backed down. But there's so many components that could go into a protocol that doesn't necessarily make the protocol bad, but it makes the experience bad, kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah, and Gustavo, again, on a roll today. I mean, it's not always like the patient safety. Because, again, when I think of and again, I'm not smart enough to necessarily be able to break down, like, scientifically, this is a bad protocol or not, But, if it is hurting patient safety or putting patients at risk or taking away the ability for patients to even just be treated or be somewhat followed along with standard of care, I feel like that's not great. But then the whole other side of that is the burden issue, which, again, sometimes I think that's what people mean when they say a bad protocol. And I've been guilty of that too. But to your point, I mean, it's not the protocol itself. It's all the things around it. And Sarah, this is a good question. I mean, I have a lot of questions about this. I wish maybe I can get like a bioethicist on here sometime to talk about some of these things, because I mean, there are things that I'm like, how is this okay? And then you think about how, these cherry-picked patient populations, that data is going to be extrapolated, and basically like they're going to prescribe it to people outside of the tested patient population. And that also gets weird to me.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. It's just, there's a lot of weird gray ethical issues that still exist in somewhere where you feel like that wouldn't be the case.
And to answer your question, Sarah, I've run into that. You get a protocol, it has that IRB rubber stamp on it, and you're like, how was this approved? On what criteria was this okay? I see problems with patient safety here. And so then that's actually a good question, Brad. If you're ever into that situation where you are a site and you run into a protocol that you were awarded, even better. Let's say you get an amendment to the protocol because now you're already in the trenches. You've got people on. And what would happen if you looked at that IRB approved protocol and said, "This isn't safe for my patients. I don't know if I really want to continue with this. I don't know if I want to put my neck on the line for this protocol." I mean, do sites have any way of reaching out to IRBs saying, "Are you sure you want to approve this?"
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. It probably wouldn't hurt, but it kind of goes into another topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately. Is how do you pick as a site? I know this is an ongoing challenge it is for us anyways. Is some sort of algorithm for like picking trials that are not just lucrative or like you can even put a bunch of patients in, but that do sort of uphold that ideal of like, look, let's not try to stick patients into a placebo arm when they could be getting treatment. Let's just stop taking those trials. And maybe that's the most powerful thing sites could do, is be like, no, we're not going to do that. But again, I admit I'm oftentimes of two minds. Like, part of me is like, hey man, this is science and we're working with very controlled groups and it's just going to be hard. And, these people they're volunteering, kind of have to take the warm and fuzzy part out. But then the other side is that, I mean, it should be of benefit to the patient. Otherwise, why in the hell would they do it? At the very least, it shouldn't be a loss or a burden.
Yeah.
And again, most studies still are.
Yeah. There's a lot of, especially in oncology, there's a lot of very altruistic patients out there. I'm terminal and I want to make sure that every last breath I have helps the next generation. There's a lot of that out there. But at the same time,
in every therapeutic area, even the ones that are not as, dire. I mean, you talk to people and they want to be doing something good for the people that come after them. I mean, again, even if it's something that's not nearly as big as cancer. And we hear it time and time again. I mean, stuff as simple as blood draw studies, like, yeah, if it will help somebody down the road, I'd love to be a part of it. So, I mean, there's no shortage of altruism, I think, in the world, I guess, which is reassuring, it makes me feel good. But at the same time, it's like, sometimes it feels like, well, how can we take advantage of that altruism and just crush every tiny piece of data that we can out of this person by asking them to do a million different things, which can be hard when you're running a site.
And we're skirting on tokenization. How do you feel about tokenization?
Dude, that's a whole nother thing. So
they put in the protocols now.
They do, but even then, I'm reading it and I have a hard time understanding, like, what are you going to do with this, when and how? And I'm never going to know, like, as a patient. And if a patient asks me, like, hey, what is this tokenization? What's going to happen? And I'm literally like, well, they might do something with some of your data sometime, and follow it for an indefinite amount of time. And I can't tell you anything more specific than that. Then what position does that put me in?
Yeah, and PS, once it's tokenized, it's going to be really hard for you to withdraw consent because it's going to be really hard to find that data.
Yeah, so, and again, I don't know. There's a lot that I'm not that educated about, which maybe that says something about the industry too. Like, if you want the sites to be able to explain it, you got to explain it to the sites. But even when I've asked, CRAs, I don't think there's a good understanding there either. So that stuff's not trickling down in terms of education in a space that's already hard to educate people about. And then layering on something even more complicated.
Yeah, and you're right. We'll have to open that up to another podcast, but that's always been something that really bugs me. I had one sample collection sponsor contact me and say, hey, we finished up this trial. We've got some residual samples. We're going to sell it to a commercial retailer. We need you to sign off on this for us. And I looked at that and I looked at the ICF and I was like, no, because what happens is you're going to go sell this to a company and then a patient's going to come up and want to withdraw consent. And then we're both going to be out of control pulling that. The commercial company is going to do what they paid for. So I'm not going to sign these off. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly fair.
Yeah, it's not fair to the patient. You've got to protect the patient.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Gustavo, I think I tend to agree. I mean, I think that's the best thing we can do, and something that I've been guilty of not doing a good enough job of. It's just turning down protocols that don't
Yep.
they aren't right. They don't feel right. They're not good for the patients. They aren't. They put people at risk, or they have a high level of burden. Now, I will say that I'm oftentimes shocked by how much patients will go through and will put up with, quote unquote, to be in a clinical trial. But I mean, again, like, it feels terrible to like take advantage of that as a,
Yeah.
someone on the
We
side
did that
level.
too. Any of those just broker studies that have zero benefit for our patients, we just said, no, this doesn't meet our quality standards. It may have made us a bunch of money, but at what cost? At what cost of trust to our community?
And so this is something we're talking about internally. Like, is there like a good algorithm for this, in terms of like burden versus safety versus
Mm-hmm.
even like potential to actually enroll patients? Because otherwise, I mean, even like a bad use of resources isn't good stewardship, when it comes to like running research, especially in institutions where resources are scarce. Like, is that anything? Have you seen like a scoring system or like something to
Yep.
run it through, or you can be like, hey, this study's green, so it means it's good, or numbered? I mean, what have you seen?
Do you remember Innovation Network Gathering last year? That was the Einstein project that we won. We talked exactly about that, and we weren't the only one. The year before that, there was some other indication of that where you assign some kind of a burden score onto a protocol, and then maybe that could give the medical writers and the IRB a little bit of a glimpse into what you're putting this patient through. So I think that we're still in development of that.
Yeah, and I'd like to see that be something
Yeah.
that gets carried forward, not just on the burden side, but even on like the scientific validity, perhaps, and maybe a sort of workforce resource score. I mean, all those things tied together, I think you've got to have at least enough in the green to be worthwhile. What's up, Dan? Always glad to see you. It's a good article here.
I'll check it out, Dan. Thank you very much. That's one of my targeted podcast episodes one day, is tokenization, because I really want to drill into it. Especially, we've got sponsors who are forcing it. This is a requirement of the study.
Yeah, we've seen that. Yeah, and we've seen it be part of the contract in which the site's not going to get paid unless tokenization is after it's been.
The
done.
scary part is I've seen it in the ICF itself, where the patient signs away rights as a result of tokenization. And that's what really scares me, is if we get to that point. Because then the sites don't have a leg to stand on, because the patients sign away their rights. So be sure to read your ICF when it comes to tokenization. Really ask yourself if that's something you want to risk for your patient.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question. I have a question for you. So I sat through one of the breakout sessions in Wisconsin. It was about research in indigenous populations. It was really interesting. I liked it, but it really got me thinking, like, is clinical research inherently exploitative? Like, and not even just in indigenous populations, but like for anyone, is it inherently exploitative? And like, I had a really hard time talking myself into thinking that it's not. When you look at things like that, like how data is handled, the insane benefit that drug companies get, and the very little, if nothing, that a patient gets.
The participants get,
and it, no one gets data back at the very least. Like, don't even know. Yeah, again, it's just so little. Again, it's like extracting resources, right? Like, it's like mining for oil, and then when you're done, you just move on and go find another.
Leave it a barren wasteland.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much.
And it feels that way. Like, but is it inherently? Does it have to be that way?
I don't think so. I really don't. And like, isn't it ironic that we have this huge community of altruistic people willing to put their lives on the line, but at the same time, those altruistic people are filling the pockets of very, very wealthy companies, some of the wealthiest in the world. It just seems like a really, really weird mix. I'm so glad that you brought that up. A lot of it has to do with history. How many times have these diverse populations been exploited? Which means there's already some bad, some really bad trust issues there. I don't think it has to, but we have to get away from, and I'll quote Mitch Hilby on this one, we have to get away from the transactional methods of clinical research. You come to me, quid pro quo, I give you this, you give me that. Okay, we're done. Wham, bam. That can't happen. That's not how it's supposed to happen. And this is where you get into community-based relationships, having a relationship before a trial even hits your doors, being a part of the community, having the people running the trials being the same diversity, the same heritage, it's literally a relationship between a community and plugging them into a bigger global industry. So I think that's the direction. You're still going to have, of course, the pharma companies making a lot of money, because otherwise they wouldn't be producing these therapeutics.
And I don't think, like, just because there's money, it doesn't mean it's inherently bad. I don't mean to imply that necessarily, but it's almost more of like
it's very unbalanced.
But what's the saying, like, that I think you're kind of alluding to in a way? It's like, think globally, act locally. Like, I don't feel like we are very connected locally, but I mean, I guess that's where the sites come in. Now, of course, they don't have the money to do it the way that a nice sponsor could, or at least a sponsor could support. Which maybe that would be a nice, like, partnership, and sponsors actually helping support sites lay that groundwork in their communities, so that it's not how many patients you got, cool, and that's pretty much it.
And Patty's on a roll here. She's given us all kinds of examples, real world of examples of pointing to different situations, different ways that this has been demonstrated in other industries and other capacities. Yeah, Boy Scouts, church, schools, all rooting to, well, not airlines, but I was going to say all rooting to relationships, but now we're talking about IT and insurance. But there's always this battle between globalizing something locally and then trying to find a balance between the benefit of the global organizations and the local communities. Are you running into the CO2 pipeline problems in Oklahoma?
I don't think so.
They're trying to literally run pipelines of toxic CO2 across rural areas to try to get it out of the big cities. So they're, like, pretty much selling their CO2 gases over to other states. We've got a big problem right here in Illinois where people in very large investment groups are trying to run pipelines from all the states around into Illinois rural areas. And they've already got case studies in, like, Mississippi, the southern states, of these pipelines bursting and literally suffocating and killing entire communities. So that's the big fight right now. But again, you've got global entities who are trying to exert themselves on the local businesses almost in a parasitic way.
I've not seen that, but we're basically run by oil and gas here in Oklahoma.
Yeah, so there you go. So
probably not dissimilar problems here.
Runs the same way.
And
yeah, that's exactly where we're going with the innovation gathering to Gustavo. Exactly where we're going. We're taking all of these different components, we're saying score, and we're doing all of these wonderful things. So it's going to happen.
You're still there?
I'm here. Are you there?
All right. Yeah, I don't know. I think my internet dropped, so
we're good.
Sorry for anyone watching at home, but yeah, Gustavo, I think there's probably something to a formula. I feel like so much of this is a little bit subjective, which is where it gets hard. But yeah, I like the concepts.
What would be subjective out of it? You could identify time spent. You could identify risk burden factor based off of patient sickness. You could identify number of procedures. There's a lot of things that you can get to be very concrete evidence on what a patient has to go through.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you have a pretty good idea generally of, especially if you've been around a little while, like how long each thing takes and how much burden that may have on a patient. Tangible patient benefit might be challenging depending on, placebo, what we know about the drug versus placebo. And, something Ethan Bond, I think, brought up from Select IQ that I wonder if is affecting protocols now is like, we're at a point where like, we're looking for like the tiniest increase. And so because of that, we are having to like limit things to really get the noise out. And I mean, is that a problem we're just going to encounter as time goes by? Is the margins are going to get slimmer and slimmer and slimmer to the point of we need a more and more precise patient population in order to pull the signal out of the noise, which makes sense to me. Again, I'm not a scientist, but
just wait
makes sense.
When you combine that, where we're going into very specific, almost tailored, customized medicine with the new requirements for diversity. The other way to hone in, every time you hone in on something, you have to increase your patient population to power.
Right.
So it's a big challenge. And Ethan's right. The more specific we get, the more we're going to have to either enroll more or be more precise in our patient populations.
Well, and that's what I mean. And I don't know. I'm curious about the concept of like, I mean, would there be benefit or almost going the opposite way, like including more, and maybe you have to get fancier with your statistical analyses at that point. But you've got a way bigger data set to work with, and it also is way more reflective of the people in the world who will actually be taking the drug, because isn't that one of the tenets of the the Belmont report? Like, it should be beneficial to that patient populations in which it's being tested on. And I don't know, I feel like there's maybe something to that, but again, I'm not a statistician, so I could be way off base here. And Gustavo, you're right. I mean, ultimately it's going to come down to each site too, because each site's going to have their own considerations. They're going to have their own structures and things that may make their decision making, may affect their decision making. So me versus the university down the street may have very different parameters by which we judge our protocols. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just curious. I think it always feels like such a moving target to me, and maybe I'm overthinking it, or maybe I'm underthinking it. One of the two, or maybe it's that after 2 months, like, oh well, we were wrong. We missed the target here, so we need to go back and recalculate, and maybe like, oh, well, this is a bad study. We need to just suck it up and back out.
Or how many amendments? That's another thing, is how many amendments does the average study have?
Well, yeah, there's all kinds of things that can happen to change the complexion. I mean, you've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen studies that I was like, this sucks. This is never going to work. And then we actually put in a little bit of work. I'm like, oh, actually, I'm shocked by how many people want to be in this trial, and it's going great. And then obviously more often the opposite, where you're like, this looks pretty good, and then you get in and you're like, whoa, wait a minute.
I underestimated this.
Right. And again, we're all human. I mean, that stuff's going to happen anyway. So, I think we just keep trying to iterate and get, closer to the truth, and, put sites in a situation where they're not taking on just bad studies. I mean, for me, that's what it's really been about, is like, how do we stop taking so many studies that really don't move the needle in either scientific progress or patient burden or patient safety or patient benefit, which again, not always obvious on the front end, but we keep trying.
Isn't that interesting? Everyone's talking about AI, including AI in protocols, but if we train AI with really bad protocols without telling AI that's a bad protocol, then it's only going to start generating more of the same.
I guess you have to have a mechanism to like feedback, right?
Yeah, and that would be great. So maybe that's what makes a bad protocol, Brad, is the ability for sites not to give feedback.
I mean, that's most That's most, I feel
Yeah,
like.
pretty much everyone. I mean, very, very rarely does a sponsor ever listen to a site. It's too far downstream. It's too late to change anything. This is the IRB approved one. We can't make changes. And then you say, but what about all these different holes? And then all of a sudden there's amendments. So of course you could have made changes.
Well, and again, that's where I've just sort of gotten to the point of like acceptance, I guess, in the stages of grief. It's just like, this is how it is, unfortunately. And I don't know, we can talk about things like DCT, which is really just going to make the more people exposed to the same problems, or AI, which maybe, again, that remains to be seen. Maybe they will have impacts over time, but at the end of the day, it just kind of seems to be kind of how it is, and maybe how it's going to be. Like, it's not going to be fast, and it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be hard and expensive, and that's just the price we're going to have to pay to continue to make progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get to that level of acceptance, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because then you kind of get complacent to it, and you don't really want to change it.
Yeah,
you have to find that balance.
Right, and that's fair. And I don't think it has to necessarily mean like doesn't mean I give up. It just means like to a certain degree we have to accept the fact that these are the limitations that we're working with, at least for now. And again, maybe things will come and change that. I'll remain skeptical as I do, but doesn't mean I don't want it to be. Thanks for coming in, Gustavo. We only got a couple minutes left anyway.
Next time, Gustavo, you should come on, man. You had some really good comments.
Yeah, this is always open invitation, man. So if anybody wants a link to pop on camera and talk, just go for it, because we're really just kind of shooting the shit. I mean, it's not a exclusive club. Patty, I know you're on here quite a bit, and I agree. Give feedback. People do listen. It's not that they don't. It's just like everything else. Like, our interaction is primarily with the CRA. CRA they've got no power, really. They can escalate that up depending on how much they care to do that. But they're not unlike us at the site level. They mean well, and they do all that they can, but their hands are also tied by layers and layers and layers, on top of them. But I don't disagree. We shouldn't not try to give that feedback.
I know we're almost out of time, Brad, but I've been getting bombarded with the question. Tell us about SOS 2025 if you can. Do you know anything?
It's going to be in Oklahoma City. Looks like it's going to be in April. I don't want to say anything else yet because we're still finalizing some things, unless things have been finalized that I'm not familiar with. But hopefully here pretty fast, we'll have things ready to announce and go. But I think broadly, it looks like we're going to do an extra day. So it's going to have, some more time for some breakouts. I think the trick is it's like building a business, man. How do we keep the culture that, built this thing, but continue to make improvements and grow it? That's kind of where we're at. I think at least I was blown away by the first year success. We want to be able to build on that, but I think we also don't want to become like every other conference that exists out there and sort of keep true to our roots. So, I mean, that's been kind of what we've been trying to really focus on, and also just get our venue booked.
Yep. It's a challenge. Everyone wants to have an event. And so those venues, they get booked out a year in advance. It's pretty insane.
It is. If we end up where I think we will, it's beautiful. I think everyone will love it. I'm excited to sort of, show off Oklahoma City a little bit. So we'll see. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll have something more concrete and start, getting tickets out there. That's good. It, man. That's really all I got. You got anything to send us out?
Big pushes Diversa Trials. Tomorrow's the very first live with a random person we met at a coffee shop who's amazing, and we're gonna have a lot more of those.
Nice.
I know Mitch Hilby. He's got some plans for some pretty cool and innovative live events. So if you haven't yet checked out the Diversa Trials LinkedIn page, at least, you may want to stay tuned because you're going to be seeing a lot of cool content. The other one is, for all of my neurodivergent friends out there, we are going live on neurodivergence in clinical research. We're going to bring on some people who are advocates for acceptance of neurodiversity in our professional environments. and you may not want to miss it. That's a pretty cool one. It's pretty good advocacy. It takes a lot of strength to talk about this.
And where is this stuff at? Where can we find it?
All over LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Yeah. So.
All right, man. Well, I hope to hear something from Dan Sferra's camp pretty soon.
I'm waiting. Well, I'm sure there'll be a post. We'll do like
he was texting me, so it's okay.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'd love to see like he can do like a cool TikTok rap. Be like, all y'all haters can go hate or something. That'd be great.
Tell him to get his ghostwriters together and see what they can
There
put
you go.
together. All right, guys. I don't know if I'll be back next week or not. Obviously, these things just kind of happen when they happen. But thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yep.
And maybe we'll see you next week. Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Bye, everyone.